there are many ways of gathering data and solving problems. You have quantitative data, you have qualitative data using in-depth interviews and focus group studies. So the question is that can we have a real life example of how this particular technique, which is to do with thematic insights, has helped to find uh, answers to a question which the world of business or the world could not find out?
I have used this technique I was facing an interview last week. It was a kind of formal interview, and they had given me a, prior sort of list of what that interview will, cover, what kind of discussion that interview will cover. So what I did is, when I was going through those documents and when I was preparing for the interview, it was more or less similar to thematic analysis. So in the first phase, I read through the documents and I highlighted the major things there, and I just came up with an initial, list of potential themes that could be, asked in the interview and covered in the interview. And then in the second round, I went a little further and kind of try to, merge them and try to consolidate, let's say, those points further and kind of come up with what my argument would be, what my points, my version. If asked this question in the interview, what my main argument and what my version would be. So I went that way in the preparation for that interview. So yes, thinking about those kind of practical real life problems, this technique could be helpful.
So it's like having a code book. You have some sort of a code book before
and it's also actually like approaching a certain problem. It's a way of approaching it, right? And it's a very, very broad way of approaching it.
Speaking for this morning, I'd like to welcome Dr. Rohan Datukorla, the pioneer behind the MBA Diary series. Doctor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. We have two very special guests today. They are both from QUT over there in Australia. And we got our very own Dimantini, who will be moderating today's session. And then, of course, Smita, who has come with some amazing experience that comes all the way from Nepal. It's absolutely an honor for us to have both these two ladies with us today. So, Dimantini, can I ask you to take over the moderation? And maybe I think Smita is going to make us initial presentation. And then after that, you would ask the questions. And it's fantastic to have two outstanding personalities, both studying for their PhD from one of the best universities in the world. And both are doing research on this whole area of how you could facilitate this whole area of better teaching around the world, because we see the world moving so fast. And now all you have to do is to see as to how you can convert that at the classroom to be much more competitive, so that what brings out in the classroom is exactly what is required by the business world where we work from. So may I invite Dimantini to take over the reins, please. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Doctor. So if I just give a small intro to Smita's profile, she is an under secretary in the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology in Nepal, where she brings her passion for education and social justice to her work. So as Dr. said, she is pursuing her PhD at Queensland University of Technology, Australia, which strengthens her commitment to academic excellence and innovation. So with a focus on inclusive education and social justice, Smita has been deeply involved in numerous research projects. Her expertise includes inclusive education, inclusive pedagogy, and also teacher education. One of Smita's notable strengths lies in qualitative research, where she employs a reflexive thematic approach to analyze data. So this approach allows her to delve into complexities of human experiences, views, and actions, broadening the understanding of complicated social problems. So today we have this Smita here, and she will share her insights and expertise with us. Smita, over to you.
Thank you, Dimantini, and thank you, Dr. Rohanta, for having me here today and for the wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. As Dimantini already mentioned, my name itself suggests I come from Nepal, and I'm doing my PhD in Queensland University of Technology, and I'm almost at the final stage now. I'm finalizing my thesis. And I feel really honored today to get this opportunity to share some of my knowledge and experience about analyzing qualitative data. So thank you very much once again for having me here. I'll start with sharing my screen. Just give me a moment. Okay, so in today's presentation, I'll try to give examples as much as I can, and those examples will mainly be from my own research projects. So I'd like to start with a brief overview of today's talk. I'll start with a very, very brief introduction to what is qualitative data analysis in terms of what it involves and what are some of the most common approaches to analyzing qualitative data. And today's main topic, of course, is thematic analysis. So after that, I'll move towards thematic analysis. And I will be talking about what thematic analysis is and what are the different ways in which thematic analysis could be conducted. And then I will move on to reflexive approach to thematic analysis, which I have used a lot in my research projects. And I will talk about some of the distinct features of reflexive approach to thematic analysis. And I will also describe how we do it based on my own experience and giving you all my examples from my own project. And I think not in this live session, but afterwards we will also have a brief practice session. So this is basically what I will try to cover in this presentation. Okay, so before jumping into thematic analysis, I would like to briefly talk about what qualitative data analysis actually involves. So in the beginning, once you have collected your data, the first stage towards the analysis process involves preparing and organizing your data for analysis. For example, if your data includes interview and you have audio recorded the interview, for example, then the preparation stage will involve you transcribing your audio recorded interviews into texts. And depending upon your purpose of the research and what kind of data and the amount of interview data you have, it may involve transcribing the whole interview into text or just some particular parts that you would like to focus on. So yeah, and if you have observation data, let's say, and observation notes or field notes, then preparing stage may mean you know, organizing those notes and uploading to a program in such a way that it's easy for you to analyze your data later. And there are a number of softwares, and I'm sure you are IT students, so you might be familiar about it more than myself. There are a lot of programs these days to help us with the analysis process, and my personal favorite is NVivo. In my projects, I have used NVivo a lot, but there are some other softwares as well. For example, my colleagues have also used atlas.ti, and there are some free source tools as well. For example, Qualcoder. So yeah, if you don't like to do the analysis manually, then you may wish to use one of those helping softwares to organize your data. And once you have prepared and organized your data, once you have decided what tool to use, and once you have uploaded your data to the tool, for example, NVivo, the next stage, of course, is analyzing the data itself. So it means going through your data rigorously and making meaning in terms of your research question. So because today's session is all about this stage, for now, I'll just say this much and I'll come back to this point later in detail. And once you have analyzed your data and once you have your findings, the next stage, of course, is to report your findings. So generally, in terms of, a research student who is working towards a master or a PhD thesis, this means writing the findings up, having a narrative of the findings. But again, depending upon what kind of research you are doing and what your research purpose is, it may also involve having some kind of visuals or pictures, or some other creative forms of creative ways of having that narration. So either way, it's about telling the audience what your findings are, either as a narrative or some visuals. And after this, we generally go back to our research question and the conceptual framework or the theoretical framework, if we have any, and also to the relevant literature. And at this stage, we interpret our findings in terms of research questions. Okay, so this is my finding. So what does this mean in terms of my research question or in terms of my theoretical framework that I have that has informed this study? Or, in comparison to other relevant literature. For example, okay, this is my finding and this is how my finding supports the findings of a prior study. Or this is my finding and this is how my finding differs from the other studies. Or, okay, this is what my research has found out and it is a completely new contribution in the field of knowledge which no other studies had done before, or something like that, So this is the interpretation and discussion stage. And another important thing during this whole analysis process is about the quality assurance part. As a researcher, it's very, very important for us to make sure that our analysis and our study findings are credible, trustworthy, and reliable enough. And in order to ensure that, we can use varieties of strategies. For example, again, if your data involves interview, then you can use a strategy called member checking to ensure the reliability of your findings. And in this strategy, for instance, you can ask your interview participants to review the initial draft of your finding report and just get some feedback from them and reconfirm with them if they are happy with the findings and if they agree or disagree with the findings. So that could be one strategy. You can also go for peer review, having your fellow students or your supervisors or other professionals that you're working with to review your work and get feedback from them. besides interview, for example, if you have qualitative data or other forms of data collected through other methods, for instance, observations or surveys or anything like that, then you can also think about triangulating your findings with the findings from the data from those other methods. So yeah, there are different strategies that you can use. But yes, again, I would like to emphasize that as a researcher and as a data analyst, it's very, very important for us to assure that, yes, our research, our analysis process is rigorous enough and to justify that our findings are trustworthy and credible enough. So in a nutshell, qualitative data analysis, it sounds like a single task, but it isn't. It involves a lot of rigorous steps of works that I have just described. Now, I would like to talk briefly about, okay, what are some common approaches to analyze qualitative data then? Because our focus in today's session is on thematic analysis, I would just very, very briefly introduce these other approaches. And I'm sure if you are interested in using one of these approaches to analyze your own data, then you would like to explore about these approaches further. So one of the common approaches used in qualitative data analysis, especially in the field of social science, which I come from, is content analysis. Content analysis is mainly about, identifying the main content that is in the data and trying to interpret their message and summarizing it and reporting it. So for example, if your research is about, okay, let's say finding out the benefits of using AI in your professional work or in your organization's day-to-day work, then you may choose to analyze your data using content analysis, and you may, intend to look for only the benefits part in your data, not in a broad sense, not in overall data, but mainly in terms of the benefits of using AI in your data, and you may want to summarize it and report it. So in that kind of research purpose, and data content analysis could be a good way to analyze your data. Another common approach used in qualitative data analysis is discourse analysis. And it involves either spoken or written discourse in the forms of conversations or narratives or texts. And discourse analysis is mainly about storing the linguistic features in the data, storing what kind of language and what kind of linguistic features are used in the data, and how those linguistic features contribute to making meaning in a given context. So discourse analysis is mainly about examining the language in use, examining the linguistic features used in the data and their patterns, and how they help to construct meaning in different social contexts. So again, for example, your research is still about AI, but instead of identifying the benefits of using AI, you are more interested in examining the language used in that and how those language and linguistic features help in meaning making and stuff like that. Then you may want to analyze your data using a discourse analysis method, not a content analysis. Yes, I already mentioned it. And there's another a bit more advanced approach to discourse analysis, which is called critical discourse analysis. And critical discourse analysis goes one step further beyond the linguistic features, and it seeks to examine the power relationship, used in the discourses. So critical discourse analysis not only looks at the linguistic level, it also assesses the power exercises through the discourses. So if you are interested in, more about how the power of language used in a particular discourse, or the linguistic features in a particular discourse, or the power relationship in a social context contributes towards meaning making in your research, then you may wish to use critical discourse analysis. And in the recent years, actually, especially in the field of psychology and social science, another very widely used approach to analyzing qualitative data is thematic analysis, which is what we will be talking in detail in today's session. Okay, so what is thematic analysis then? What do you think about it? Even though this presentation is supposed to be a kind of talk from me, I would like to encourage you all to express your opinions as well in the meantime. So please feel free to express, for example, your understanding of thematic analysis or any questions that arise during my presentation in the chat. We will try to address those questions later. Okay, so how do you understand thematic analysis? What is it then? Please, again, feel free to share your ideas in the chat. So thematic analysis is, of course, also an approach to analyzing qualitative data like content analysis or discourse analysis, as we talked before. And this approach is about identifying and analyzing and reporting patterns of themes within the data. So thematic analysis, I would rather say that it's a bit broader in the sense that it does not only look at the main contents in the data, like content analysis, or it doesn't actually concentrate on the linguistic level or the linguistic features of the data. So does the discourse analysis, as I mentioned before. It goes a little broader than that, and thematic analysis aims at having a broader lens towards the data and, identifying what kind of common themes arise in the data. So, for example, again, the AI research I was talking about before, you're still doing a research about the use of AI in your workplace. But you are rather interested in, exploring how people view about using AI in the everyday work. So instead of concentrating on the benefits only, or the drawbacks only, or the linguistic features only, if your research aims at exploring broadly the common views about using AI in everyday work, for example, then you may wish to go for thematic analysis to analyze your data. So I'll try to clarify this with my examples throughout my presentation. So before that, let's see how thematic analysis works then. So you have a data set, as I mentioned earlier. Once you have data, you prepare and organize your data for analysis, right? So at this stage, you have your data set. It could be your interview data, transcriptions, or your observation notes, or some videos or images or anything, any type of qualitative data. So you have your data set. And then you start exploring your data set and trying to make meaning out of it. So for this, you start with coding your data. So code is usually defined as the most basic or the smallest unit of the data that makes some sense, that is somehow meaningful. So it usually contains either a word or a phrase, and it symbolizes a meaningful segment of the data. So at the first stage of your thematic analysis process, when you have your data set ready and organized for analysis, you do coding first, and you come up with individual codes from the data. So I'll clarify this with another example later. So once you have individual codes, what you do next is you try to identify the patterns of meanings among the codes, which are called themes in thematic analysis. And a theme is a patterned response or a meaning that captures something important from your data in relation to your research question. So it means a theme. If you start to see some kind of patterns in your code, some kinds of patterns of meanings in your codes, then in the next stage, you try to merge them or combine them and go a bit more in depth and try to identify the underlying concept that lies among the codes, and you try to come up with the themes. Okay, let's see this example, and I hope this example will give you a clearer idea. As I mentioned earlier, all the examples that I have used in today's presentations are from my own research works before. And as Dimantini already introduced me as a researcher in the field of inclusive education, so I would just like to clarify here that my examples will mainly be about diversity, inclusive education, or social justice. So in this example, I have a bit of data chunks here. Let's read it together. So for example, for the first excerpt here, this is from one of my research projects, and these are the interview excerpts from my participants. So this was mainly about how do you understand student diversity, and these expressions were around that question. So one of the participants said, I think diversity is a broad concept in itself that includes, for example, cultural diversity, physical diversity, or intellectual diversity. Students can have differences on these various grounds. So when I was, in exploring this data, and I found that, okay, this particular person is trying to highlight that diversity is about the differences among the students. So, I mean, you can look at the same data in a different way, but for me, what I thought is, okay, this in this data chunk here, what the person is trying to convey is, or what the meaning this data chunk is trying to convey is, students have differences, so diversity is about differences. So what I did is I made a code named differences, and I coded this part of the interview data into the codes as differences. Now let's look at the another chunk. Other person said, I think diversity means inequalities among people based on different castes, languages, religion, and classes. This person also talked about different rather than differences. So I made another code out of it called inequality. And then I went on coding the other data sets. And as you can see in the bits with yellow highlights, these people are aligned more towards diversity as differences. So what I did is I coded those data into the code differences. And in the blue highlight, you can see that this person is also saying, okay, diversity is not only about differences, but it is also about inequality. For example, that person is saying, but they have not been able to entertain this right equally. So what this person is saying is, yes, there are different kinds of students. There are differences among students. But because of those differences, they are not, feeling equal, or they are not being able to exercise all their rights equally. So this person is also saying that that difference is causing inequality. So what I did here is I coded the same chunk of data to two different codes, because this person is referring to both differences and inequality. Okay. So this is how in the first stage I come up with codes like this. So from this part of data, I come up with two codes, differences in inequality. Now moving towards generating themes, what I did here is, okay, so what are these codes telling me then as a researcher? So if I go a bit deeper, then what is the underlying meaning that can be conveyed out of these codes? Then after that, I kind of came up with a potential theme like this. Okay, yes, the participants are saying that students have differences, and they are also saying that these differences may cause inequality. So one example of the underlying theme here could be differences causing inequalities. So this could be one way of looking at it, right? So yeah, this is one example of how thematic analysis works while you are analyzing your qualitative data using this approach. I hope this example helped you a little bit to have a clearer idea, but we will be talking about it more in my presentation. So I would like to go forward. Okay, so this is a general introduction to what thematic analysis is and how it works. But does thematic analysis always work the same way, or if there is only one way of doing thematic analysis? No, there isn't. And my approach to thematic analysis is highly informed by Brown and Clark. So everything I am talking today about thematic analysis I have used the references from Brown and Clark. And I have included a list of those useful references for you at the end of this presentation. And Brown and Clark talk about three different approaches to thematic analysis, which are called coding reliability, codebook, and reflexive. Again, and these three approaches are differentiated based on the degree of qualitative orientation a research has. I mean, the kind of research, how big the qualitative orientation in your research is, helps you to determine which approach to thematic analysis to go for. So if you have if you're still doing a qualitative research, but the qualitative orientation is not very big, and your research is informed by a positivist or post-positivist research paradigm, so this is usually called as having a small Q orientation, and in that case, coding reliability approach could be more suitable for you. And at the other end of the continuum is reflexive approach. And if you have a big qualitative focus in your research, and your research is informed by an interpretive paradigm or constructivist paradigm, then reflexive approach to thematic analysis could be a better way to analyze your data. So then what is coding reliability then? So Brown and Clark do not explain these three approaches as mutually exclusive, one or the other. They rather describe these three approaches to have formed a kind of continuum, as you can see in the diagram. So at the one end of the continuum is coding reliability approach. So if your research aims at generating some kind of objective knowledge, or to validate something, or to test a kind of hypothesis, and you are more oriented towards the accuracy of your data analysis rather than subjectivity, then coding reliability could be a good way to analyze your data. So it's more about having objective knowledge out of your data, and focusing more on accuracy. So this approach, in a way, discards researcher's subjectivity, and at the other end of the continuum is the reflexive approach to thematic analysis. So if your research is more about generating a kind of subjective knowledge, and if you are interested in having your subjectivity, your reflexivity as a researcher to be useful in your analysis process, rather than, aiming for an accurate or objective sort of knowledge, then a reflexive approach to thematic analysis could be a better way for you to go for. So coding reliability approach usually starts with a list of potential codes and themes. So it's a bit deductive in the way it works. For example, you have your data set, and if you have a predetermined kind of potential codes, okay, so this is my data, these are my research questions, and from this data, I may get this kind of codes already. Then your approach is more about using coding reliability. But on the other hand, if you are approaching your data fully inductively, you don't have a predetermined or a pre-designed list of codes and themes. You are generating codes and themes as you go through your data inductively. Then it's more about reflexive approach to thematic analysis. And somehow in the middle of these two approaches lies the codebook approach, as Brown and Clark describe it. So codebook approach is neither fully objectivity oriented nor fully subjectivity oriented. So it kind of combines the elements of both coding reliability and reflexive approaches to thematic analysis. For example, if you are using a codebook approach to thematic analysis, you may still have a tentative list of, pre-assumed codes. And when you go more deeply towards your data, you may become more inductive, and you may end up having a totally different list of codes otherwise, or something like that. And unlike coding reliability approach, codebook approach also values researchers' subjectivity and reflexivity. It doesn't totally aim to generate an objective knowledge from your research. It doesn't completely intend to verify the accuracy of your findings. It rather values researchers' subjectivity, but it still has some components of coding reliability, for example, a predetermined set of codes or stuff like that, if you are using a codebook approach. So now, for you as a researcher, what helps you to determine what approach of thematic analysis to go for is, of course, first of all, your research purpose. So if your research purpose is to generate an objective knowledge, you go for coding reliability. If it is to just if your purpose is more explorative, and you would like to generate constructive or interpretive knowledge inductively from your data without having a predetermined mindset or coding set, then you go for reflexive approach. And if you think that it will probably be difficult for you to stick to one particular end, and you would rather like to combine some elements of both the approaches, and if you feel like for your research purpose, for your research data, for your research question, combining the elements of both approaches will fit more, then you may choose to go for the codebook approach. So yeah, it totally depends upon what kind of research you are doing, what purpose your research has, and what kind of data you have, and how you want to approach it, how you want to analyze it as a researcher. So again, My favorite is reflexive approach to thematic analysis, and in my research projects, I have mostly used the reflexive approach to thematic analysis. So in this session, I will be sharing an example with you of how I conducted reflexive thematic analysis, what process I went through during this analysis process. So as I mentioned earlier as well, reflexive approach to thematic analysis is different from the other two approaches that I just talked about. In terms of its support to rich and thoughtful analysis of data instead of some objective and accurate analysis of data. It values researchers' subjectivity as a resource for research. So that means as a researcher, your own background, your own experience, your own subjectivity, your own opinions are valuable resource for your analysis process. You do not need to be completely objective when you're analyzing your data. And it also uses researcher reflexivity as a means of ensuring the quality of the data. It means data analysis in the process of reflexive thematic analysis is not a linear process. It's a kind of iterative process. So it doesn't happen in a linear line, straightforward way. You go back and forth to your data, come back to it, and it's a kind of iterative and evolving process. I will explain it with an example shortly. So this is some distinct characteristics of reflexive approach, and these are the reasons why I choose reflexive approach to thematic analysis in my qualitative research projects. So to give you an example, and this example is from my PhD project, which I have almost finalized now. So my research purpose for this project is exploring teachers' preparedness to teach inclusively. So I don't intend to, identify just the major content about teachers' preparedness or having some kind of objective knowledge or testing some kind of hypothesis about teachers' preparedness, but rather I intend to broadly explore how teachers are being prepared to teach inclusively. So I think my research purpose, that is why, fits more with the reflexive approach to thematic analysis. And I also have a big Q orientation. So I have collected my data using semi-structured interviews, and my research is informed by an interpretive paradigm. I believe in a constructivist worldview. I believe that there is not a single reality. I believe in multiple realities, and I believe that there could be multiple perspectives towards teachers' preparedness to teach inclusively. So yeah, I have a big qualitative orientation in my research, and that is also why I decided to go for the reflexive approach to thematic analysis. And I also believe that as a researcher, my role is key in analyzing my data. For example, I come from education background. I have worked for the government system in Nepal for a long time, and I am also involved in many teacher professional development projects. So I bring my own experience as well in the data analysis process, and I believe that experience is an advantage for me in analyzing my data. So that is also why I chose to go for a reflexive approach to thematic analysis. So in your research, the kind of research you are doing, if you also think that, okay, for these reasons, reflexive approach sounds better for me to go for, then yeah, of course, you can go for reflexive approach to thematic analysis. But I just try to give you an example of why I decided to go for it. So after I decided to choose reflexive approach in my PhD project, now the next thing I am talking about is the process I adopted for it. So how did I analyze my data? So Brown and Clark talk about 6 stages of reflexive thematic analysis. Even though they say that there is not a fixed way of conducting thematic analysis and it is a flexible way, they also suggest that if as a researcher we follow these 6 steps, it is helpful for us to carry out our analysis process easily and thoroughly. So these stages involve familiarization with the data, systematic coding, generating initial themes, developing and reviewing themes, defining and naming things, and write-up. So when I started my analysis process in my PhD research, for example, the first 3 steps I could go exactly as the way Brown and Clark has suggested. I am talking about these stages one by one shortly. But once I had my initial themes, it was really difficult for me to demarcate between the 4th and 5th stages here. So developing and reviewing themes and defining and naming things. For me, I found it easier to combine these 2 steps and reviewing and refining and naming themes together. So this is one adaptation I have made during my data analysis in the way Brown and Clark had suggested. So I'll explain that shortly. So now I'm going to talk about each of these steps one by one with my own example. So the first stage for me was, of course, familiarization with the data set. So it actually started as soon as I started conducted the interviews. So once I had my interviews, I listened to my recordings again and again, and I tried to make sense of, okay, what this participant is saying to me and why this participant is saying this and stuffs like that. And another thing that helped me a lot is that I transcribed all the interview data by myself. So transcribing those interviews from audio to text was a very, very helpful process for me to be familiar with my data. So by the time I had all my transcripts ready, I was already quite familiar with my data, I would say. So this was a very, very helpful process. But nowadays there are different tools available, of course, to transcribe your data. There are different softwares available to helpful. So you may choose to use the software instead of transcribing the data manually. It's totally your choice, but it's really, really important to be familiar with your data here. And it also involves listening, even after having the transcripts, listening to the audio again and checking whether the transcription has incorporated all the elements from the audios, if there is not something important missing and stuff like that. So checking alignments between the interview audio and the transcript is very, very important. That's what I did. And repeatedly reading the transcripts helped me to deeply immerse myself into the data. So not only, in a straightforward and descriptive way, but I also kind of interrogated myself. Okay, this is why the particular participant, this participant is talking about this thing. But why is this participant saying this? What could be the reason behind it? Those kind of stops and questions and interrogations, and note making and highlighting, of course. It's very, very useful to be familiar with your data, and it also helps in your coding stage later. So these are some of the strategies that we as researchers can use in this familiarization stage. And this is what I also did myself. Yeah, and after I felt like, okay, I'm familiar with enough with my data, then I moved towards the second stage, that is systematic coding. So as I already defined, code is the most basic meaningful segment in your data. And it involves identifying some meaningful segment from the data, some interesting segment from the data, and which has some meaning in terms of your research questions, of course, what you are trying to achieve out of your research. And through your deep and active engagement with the data, you come up with the codes, like in the example of the codes about differences and inequality in the example before. And there are, I have said this before as well, there are many tools and softwares that are very helpful in the coding process. I particularly like NVivo, and it's very, very helpful. So if you are also thinking of using this kind of softwares or tools in your data, so once you have your transcripts, for example, or your data ready, you upload the transcript or the data to the software like NVivo, and NVivo helps you to organize your codes and making a list of codes and stuff like that. So I personally, I have used NVivo a lot, and I really recommend using this software for qualitative data analysis. And as I mentioned before as well, coding, again, it's not a linear process. It's an iterative process. So first you read through your data, your transcripts, and keep coding them. So once you have an initial list of codes, you don't stop there. You go back to your data and you try to refine your codes. You sometimes merge two codes. You sometimes delete some of the codes, which you may have found to be meaningful in the first stage, but going back again through your data, you may think that, okay, it may not be very relevant for me. Then you may just decide to delete it. So yeah, the second and third round of coding is about refining the initial list of your codes. And it involves both inductive and deductive way of doing it. Just to tell you briefly, reflexive approach to thematic analysis mainly uses an inductive orientation to data. And that means you don't have a predetermined set of codes and mindsets before. You go on coding your data as you read through it. That's what I have also done in my PhD project. But it's not always inductive, you still have your research questions and your theoretical framework that is guiding you towards the coding process. So you may, you end up using a combination of both inductive and deductive approach of analyzing the data. And Brown and Clark also say that inductive and deductive approaches are not mutually exclusive. Again, this is also a kind of continuum to use as a researcher. So sometimes you can be more inductive and sometimes you can be a bit more deductive. So it's totally fine for you to use both inductive and deductive approach to coding data as the way you see fit in your research and in your purpose. And another important thing is to understand the latent and semantic level of coding. So semantic coding means that coming up with the codes which are more explicit in the data. For example, using the same phrase used in the data. If you remember my prior example, in the first code, I used the same word differences. That was used exactly the same way in the data itself. So it was a bit semantic code. But you may not always want to have semantic codes. You may sometimes go a bit deeper even in the coding process, and you may come up with a bit more latent level of coding. That means a bit more implicit codes, or a bit more, the underlying concept or something like that. So you can use the combination of all these in your coding process. There is not a hard and fast rule that this process is right or wrong. So as a researcher, again, these are not mutually exclusive. You can use a continuum of these approaches as you see fit in your own research and data. So to give you an example again from my own data, so during the coding process, I had my data set. So my data set in this particular project involved the interview transcripts from 10 participants. I had conducted semi-structured interviews. So I had 10 interview transcripts, which were about 40 to 60 minutes in length in the audio. So that means a lot of data, of course. So from those data set, in the first stage, I came up with these initial quotes. So these are about, so one of my interview questions was about, okay, how do you think your society views disability? And the responses from the participants gave me an initial list of these codes. Some of the participants interpreted it as, okay, the society thinks that disability is a kind of humiliation. The people in the society bully people with disability. They also think that it is a kind of burden for the family and the society itself. And some participants said that, okay, people with disability do not have the capacity to do anything. They are incapacitated. They always need a kind of support. And some also described it as karma, the result of your past misbehaves or wrongdoings, and the God has punished you and stuff like that. So these were the codes I came up with in the initial round once I coded all my 10 interview transcripts. So again, as I described before, in this initial stage, my approach was mainly inductive. And these codes are mainly semantic. So these codes are usually the explicitly expressed views by the participant. So this was my first round of coding in this project. And after I had this initial list, I went back to my data. I read the transcripts again. I revisited my research questions and conceptual framework, and I tried to refine my list of codes. And in this refinement process, I was not only using the inductive orientation, I was also being deductive. I was also using my research questions more than before and my theoretical framework more than before. And then I came up with these refined codes. So looking at these initial codes a bit more deeply, what I understood is, okay, in whatever way the participants were describing the views towards disability, in one way or other, they were referring that, okay, the society considers disability as a kind of vulnerability. The society says that people with disability are somehow vulnerable. So that was a kind of underlying message in all of those codes. So what I did here is I merged these 4 codes into a category called disability as vulnerability. And because karma, and the view about disability as a karma was a bit distinct from the other ones, I kept it as it is, naming it disability as karma. So in the second and third round of revisiting the codes, I came up with these 2 refined codes. And here, these codes are a bit more latent. So these were not very explicit in the data, but with my active engagement and my thorough thinking and analysis process, I refined and I named these codes as this. So at this level, my codes became a bit more latent. But please do not think that semantic codes are basic and latent themes are better. Again, depending upon the type of data you have, even semantic scores can be very, very helpful and good for you. So you can choose to use a combination of both semantic and latent themes, as I did. So this is the coding process, the second stage of the reflexive thematic analysis process. And once I felt like, okay, I have a good list of codes now, then I moved towards the third stage, which is generating initial themes. So as I defined earlier, themes is a kind of patterned meaning that come out of your codes. So when you are trying to generate initial themes, you are trying to identify a patterned response in your codes. Okay, what are these code actually telling me? And these do not generate themselves. The themes do not emerge themselves. You come up with the themes using your own thinking and analysis process, your own subjectivity and your own reflexivity in the reflexive thematic analysis process. So at this stage, again, going back to my example, so from the refined list, I had these 4 refined codes: disability as vulnerability, disability as karma, and discrimination between diverse group of people. So not only regarding disability, but I also asked them about the views about diversity, human diversity in general, and a narrow understanding of diversity. So these 4 came from the refined list of codes. And in the next phase, what I did is, okay, I still have a long list of code. Now I need to further narrow down this, and I need to go a bit deeper now, and I need to, identify a more underlying sort of meaning here, more underlying sort of concept here. So what I came up with is, okay, either you call it as a vulnerability or a karma. Disability has been interpreted as a kind of disadvantage rather than a normal human phenomena. It is considered as a disadvantage in the society. Similarly, if in whatever way the participants described it, either as discrimination or narrow understanding of diversity, again, they also meant that, okay, the society considers human diversity also as a disadvantage. It's not a resource. It is not a good thing. It is a kind of some negative thing or a disadvantage. So this is what this is the meaning I made up from the data and this analysis process. And then these 2 became my candidate themes. And I felt like, okay, because these both candidate themes are kind of conveying same kind of meaning, I merged them further. And then I made a potential theme like diversity and disability as disadvantage. So at this stage now, after all this process, I come up with a potential list of themes. And combining all these potential themes together in my project, this is how the initial thematic map looked like for me. So as you can see, in the red circle here in the middle, this is my research question. This is my research aim: to identify, to explore teachers' preparedness to teach inclusively. And the green ovals here, the green layer here is the list of my potential themes, which I came up from the 3 stages of analysis that I just described with examples. And in the outer blue layer here is the list of my refined codes, which here are functioning as my sub-themes, And this 4th layer here, I will get rid of this later, but because I could not identify until this stage, I could not identify a way to merge these into the sub-theme label. I left them as they are here. So this is how my initial thematic map looked like. So this is what the output of my initial thematic process, the output of the 3 initial stages of the thematic analysis process. So after having this initial stage, I went towards the 4th stage for me, which I combined the stage 4 and 5 from the Brown and Clark suggested list. So at this stage, I re-engaged with my data. I rechecked the alignment of these findings with my research questions and my conceptual framework. Just to give you an idea, this is my conceptual framework that I used. I'm looking at the research questions from a sociocultural perspective. So I'm looking at how their sociocultural context and their institutional and historical settings influence their learning and their preparation to become an inclusive teacher. And I'm also looking at how teacher education contribute towards that. And so this is my conceptual framework. So in this fourth stage of my data analysis, I revisited my conceptual framework. I revisited my questions. So these were my research questions. And I looked back at my data again and the thematic map again. So this process helped me to consolidate my themes further and came up with a refined and updated thematic map. So what I did at this stage is, as you can see, there were 8 potential themes in the green layer in my initial thematic map. Now I have reduced it to 7. So I merged 2 of them in this refinement stage. And I also kind of, if you can see these arrows here, and I tried to incorporate my conceptual framework into this thematic map. And I tried to see, okay, what story is this thematic map telling me from the perspective of my conceptual framework. So this stage helped me to refine my themes and codes further and come up with an updated thematic map like this. And after having this output, I started writing up my findings. And when I was writing about my themes and sub-themes, and I was trying to tell a story of what my findings are telling me, so this process actually helped me further refine my findings. So if you can see here, my 7 themes now are shifted to 6 themes. So when I was writing about some of the themes, I realized that, okay, this is not, this theme is not sufficient to stand alone as a theme. It can rather be combined with the other theme. Or I don't think I have sufficient supporting data to justify this theme and stuff like that. So as you can see, this final thematic map, it's much narrower and more succinct than the previous thematic map. And I could get rid of the 4th layer here. And from this thematic map and the incorporation of the conceptual framework, I could come up with a really good and thorough story of what my data was telling me. So this is, I hope this example is helpful for you to, visualize, okay, what thematic analysis is and how it works in reality, in practice. And after writing up these findings, of course, in the next step, I interpreted and discussed my findings using relevant literature and my research questions. That was the next step for me. So yeah, this is what I have to share with you today. And I hope this sharing has been very helpful to you. I tried my best to make it look more practical rather than theoretical. And these are some of the references I have often very frequently in my research projects, and I find them very, very, very useful. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, my work is very heavily informed by Brown and Clark's work. So most of my references here, as you can see, are from their work. And I have also included some useful YouTube videos, which I found really, really helpful, to give me some practical ideas and a more clear picture about what the analysis process looks like. So you may find them useful too. So yeah, this is the end of my presentation for this live session today. I really hope it was useful for you, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you have. And I'm also happy to be contacted via email if you Later, if you have any questions about my own projects or the way I did reflexive thematic analysis or about anything that I talked about today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Smita. So now let's move to our Q&A portion. So we'd like to hear from all of you. And if you have any questions for our speaker, please feel free to post them in the chat. And I think, Smita, we have a couple of questions coming in now itself.
All right.
So yeah, so we'll start with the first question which came to us. So it's an interesting question. So one of our attendees are asking how many rounds of coding and development of themes would be appropriate in a project and how you are going to decide on that.
Honestly, there is not a straightforward answer to this question. So as I said, it's a very iterative process and it involves a lot of revisiting your data, going back and forth to your data. But in my experience, once you go for usually the third round, at least for me, once I had gone to my data on the third round and have come up with a refined list of code after the third round of coding and editing, I have usually felt comfortable enough to go move towards the next stage of generating themes. So it may not be the same for everybody, right? So it's really up to you as a researcher in what stage you feel comfortable enough and confident enough in your codes, and you feel like, okay, now I think my codes are good enough and justifiable enough, and I can move ahead towards themes. And I would also say that if you are students, then you may also seek some feedback and advice from your professors or research supervisors. That is also very, very helpful, because sometimes, what happens when you are just going through all the data, coding, and it becomes so rigorous and so intense at one point. A feedback from someone else, advice from someone else, a quick look from someone else really helps a lot. So at least that is what I have experienced. So yeah, I would say that it's not very hard and fast. I can't say it in number, but I would definitely go at least for a second round. And a third round, I have always found very, very helpful.
Yeah. So that's another question. So he's saying he's very curious about, conducting his qualitative research. And what he asked, so after coming up with these themes, what would be the best approach to proceed with the writing process? How they have to, inline their findings.
Okay, again, this also depends upon you, because as I said, reflexive approach is all about researcher subjectivity. There is not an objective or a very, fixed way of doing it. It's very flexible. So it's, again, totally depends upon how, as a researcher, you see the best way to go with the writing. So if you ask for my experience, what I have usually done in my projects is, after having that thematic map, having that visual map has been very, very helpful for me. So you can either use, in my case, in the example I presented today, that map has been developed using the same NVivo software, but you can do it manually as well, or use different mind map softwares and anything you're comfortable with. So having that visual map, and when you start writing, what I do usually is I cut out one theme and sub-theme, and then I look back at my data, and I try to identify from the data, okay, what part of the data is related to this theme and these sub-themes. So I try to bring those quotes or excerpts of whatever type of data you have. For example, in the example I showed you, I had interview data. So what I did is, after cutting that one theme out, I pulled some of the interview quotes that were related to those themes and sub-themes to the document, and I read through the interview quotes again, and I tried to come up with a kind of story. Okay, this is theme, for example, diversity as disadvantage, right? So that was one of my themes, as I showed you earlier. So I pulled all the interview quotes that were supporting this theme and those sub-themes. I pasted them in a Word document, made a kind of skeleton out of them, and then try to interpret, that theme. Okay, the participants are saying that this and the following examples support this, but some other participants were also responding in this way, and these examples, provide evidence for that and stuff like that. So yeah, that is one way of doing it, and I have found it very, very useful in my case, but you may come up with some other ways. So yeah, just use your creativity, your subjectivity, but having something visual like that map and starting with those visual and the chunks of the data supporting those themes and something is a very, very good way to go with it.
Yeah. And this is something about your career. So they're asking, what inspired you to pursue your PhD while holding a prominent position in the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology in Nepal?
That's an interesting question. Thank you. Yes, what I'm doing right now academically is a bit different from what I'm doing as a government employee back home. But even working within the government, my working sector is teacher professional development. So even as a government employee, my main job involves providing capacity building programs, trainings to teachers. So that is why actually is the main motivation for me to go for a higher studies and develop my pedagogical knowledge and skills a bit further. So my PhD is about inclusive pedagogy. And there is another a bit personal reason, personal motivation to it as well, to go for my other registrations. I don't know about Sri Lanka, but in Nepal, yes, we have committed to inclusive education for quite a long period of time now, but our schools are not inclusive yet. And being a government employee myself, working within the system for a long time, I have to admit that. And I have a son who has intellectual disability. And when we were looking for schools for him, we struggled a lot. We're still struggling a lot, and the schools would often reject to enroll him, saying that, see, we don't have that capacity, to include your child in our school. Our teachers are not prepared enough, to include a child with disability, especially intellectual disability, in their classrooms. So that is another trigger for me why I was motivated towards this research. So my aim is to now go back to my country after I submit my thesis, which I'm very close to now, and then continue with my job and contribute what I can to make our teacher trainings a bit more inclusive, to equip our teachers with a bit more knowledge and skills for inclusive pedagogy. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, so we wish all the best for our
Thank you.
dreams. And then we will take this question as our last question. So they're asking now, when the transcripts are ready and in hand, how they could do this manually. Is that the same process that they have to follow, like what we have discussed, or is it something different?
Well, yes, the basic process is the same. It's just that using a software helps you a little further, right? So if you want to do it manually, so I have done manually as well in one of my projects before. So if you want to do it manually, what I did is, at that time also I had interview data, and I used Excel. That was helpful for me. I didn't use any other tool like NVivo. I used Excel, and what I did is in one column, I put the extracts from the interview just all, it was a long document though. So, and then in the second round, what I did is when I was coding is I just read through the data, and in this second column, I just, noted down the initial codes, and I had another column for refined codes, and so basically it was the same process, but I was just doing it manually. So it took a bit longer, honestly, then it took when I was using NBIBO, but it was otherwise the same process.
Okay, thank you, Smita. And I think we have come towards the end of our session today, Doctor.
Thank you, Demanti. Very interesting. There are a whole set of questions that has come from some of my students. May I just pick? May I just shoot it at Smita?
Sure. I'll try my best to answer them.
Okay. One question that is coming, Smita, is that there are many ways of gathering data and solving problems. You have quantitative data, you have qualitative data using in-depth interviews and focus group studies. So the question is that can we have a real life example of how this particular technique, which is to do with thematic insights, has helped to find answers to a question which the world of business or the world could not find out? Over.
You mean to answer not your research question? Or sorry, I would like to be a bit more clear about the question itself.
Okay. See, we always do research, Smita, to find an answer to a problem.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So what they're asking is that now we are used to doing research, either doing quantitative research, where we identify a sample of 384, and then we get data and we analyze it. Now, or otherwise, if you're doing qualitative research, we might do an in-depth interview with a person, or we might do focus group technique, to solve a problem. So what the question is asking is, give us an example where this area of thematic insights, which is a different technique by which you solve a problem, is a case study of the usefulness of this technique to solve a problem.
Doctor, can I come in there?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so if I talk about my research, right? So I have a research question where I need to find out the evolving nature of skills. So in that case, what I actually did, I selected this qualitative research method where I'm trying to look into the document analysis. So mainly I was looking at the job advertisements and, the technical and then the professional skills which were listed in my job advertisements in here. And then what I did actually, I went through each and every job advertisement and find out what sort of skills this industry is asking from our graduates. So then in that case, I came up with, as Smita discussed, I came up with a lot of codes. And then I was able to identify something like, at the very initial stage, it came up to 136 different sort of skills from these 200 plus job advertisements. Then what I did, I went for the second round and I again, further refined my codes. And finally, I ended up with 4 different competencies which are required for this dynamic professional. So it's like that, Doctor, you can really look into your question and then start, as she said, you can start with the first round of coding. And then it'll keep on refining and we come up to a level where we can really manage and answer our question. Yeah.
Thanks, Dimantini. I was also thinking of a similar example. So I have used this technique I was facing an interview last week. It was a kind of formal interview, and they had given me a prior sort of list of what that interview will, cover, what kind of discussion that interview will cover. So what I did is, when I was going through those documents and when I was preparing for the interview, it was more or less similar to thematic analysis. So in the first phase, I read through the documents and I highlighted the major things there, and I just came up with an initial, list of potential themes that could be, asked in the interview and covered in the interview. And then in the second round, I went a little further and kind of try to, merge them and try to consolidate, let's say, those points further and kind of come up with what my argument would be, what my points, my version, if asked this question in the interview, what my main argument and what my version would be. So I went that way in the preparation for that interview. So yes, thinking about those kind of practical real life problems, this technique could be helpful.
So it's like having a code book. You have some sort of a code book before
and it's also actually like approaching a certain problem. It's a way of approaching it, right? And it's a very, very broad way of approaching it.
Yeah.
So
compared to
the
other
question,
techniques.
Yeah, absolutely, Smita. I think, thank you, Dimantini. I think that's a very good example where you analyze the different types of skill sets which are required, and then you zero down into your second round where you find 4 key themes as to what people are actually looking for a job. And then, of course, from that, you will maybe analyze and say, how do I make sure that that skill set is being taught or brought out in the classroom, so that then the product that you deliver in terms of the person you build is a marketable property to a company. So that's I agree 100%. Is there from when you were doing research, did you find any other example that has used this thematic insights, either Smita or Dimantini?
Sorry,
You mean
doctor?
other research?
Thematic, yeah. Is there any other example in real life which the thematic and insights brought out a fantastic solution? It's a case study in the world.
You're asking
My
from
own
my
experience. So
Maybe not only your experience, Mita, but any data that has been captured, which has been solved through thematic insights.
So maybe to
Yes,
identify the business insights, right, from the data. It's always not only you are looking at the quantitative data. So if you just have some discussions with your customers and see why they buy a particular product and so on, you can come up with such insights as well. So we do them. I mean, they are not particularly name it as thematic analysis, but what they're doing is that.
Okay. Sorry, Smita, go ahead. Thanks, Dimantini.
Yes, of course, I have reviewed and referred to a lot of research. So because I think in this context, we are mainly talking about research, and I am sharing my research experience with you people. So yes, my examples definitely, again, go back to the research work. Yes, there are a number of, actually in the recent, so the first time thematic analysis was introduced in the field of research was in 2006 by Brown and Clark. So ever since, this approach has been used quite widely. So if we just browse through Google Scholar or our libraries, we can find so many research works that have used this approach, but in different ways. And not only in the student research or that kind of research. So I was just thinking about a recent example of, there was a project in Australia that was led by my supervisor, and it was assigned by the government here to analyze inclusive education policy across all states and territories. And in this project, I was a part of it. So we uh, collected all the policy documents from all 8 states and territories here, and we used the same approach that I just described in analyzing those policies as well. So we have different fields of work, right? I come from an education field, so my examples are definitely linked somehow to education. So yeah, it's not only as a research student or as a project, long-term project, but even in our everyday institutional, organizational work, yes, we can find ways to use this approach in some way or other.
Actually, I just did a bit of research because one of the verticals that I work in is AI company out of Bangalore, and what they say is that they also use thematic analysis, and they gave the example of Maldives tourism, where they have done research to find out why somebody goes to Maldives for a holiday, paying $15,000 a night. And what comes out is that there are many reasons. Like some people say they would like to go for a spa treatment. Some say they would go in for water sports. Some say that they would want to go for conferences. Then they say them go for relaxation. So there are many themes that come out as to why they would go for a holiday in Maldives. But when they do a deep dive and they find out is that one of the most important themes that come out is that when you, I'm just articulating what they have said, is that wherever you look, you see an infinite scenery, which is that you see the beach and you see the sky meeting. And they say that experience 360 degrees they don't get uh, anywhere else, and that's what makes it memorable apparently, and which is what people pay $15,000 to get. And now they say that from that thematic insight or that research insight, what they do is that they have made an underground water bungalow, which gives you a 360-degree view of this of the water and the sharks and the other types of fish, which is all swimming, which once again you don't get anywhere in the world. So these two experiences, where they are saying that they can market it for $15,000 room night in the Ritz-Carltons and the World of Astoria kinds of brands that are there in Maldives. So I think it's a fantastic method of getting consumer insights, which you will not get through in-depth interviews and focus group studies. So I thank you so much, Smita. It has been really brilliant
Thank you,
us.
Dr. Rohanta. That's a wonderful example. Yes, as I already say, I also said before that it's not a hard and fast way of looking at data. It's a very flexible way, and depending upon your field, the purpose you're using it, the type of data you have, the type of data you're looking at, yeah, it could be used in different ways, and it's totally fine. And I would also like to clarify one more thing. As I said before as well, what I shared today and what example I presented today is mainly and highly informed by Brown and Clark. But Brown and Clark are not the only scholars using and advocating for thematic analysis, right? There are other scholars which may have a bit different ways of doing it. So yeah, my today's presentation may not speak for all those different varieties and ways it can be done. It is just one example of doing it and how I did it. So I really hope it was helpful, and thank you so much. It was very good example.
Thank you very much, Smita, and I think it's really brilliant because see, we tend to be comfortable with the way in which we gather data. So normally quantitative data is the easiest way of getting data. You do a questionnaire, you get the data, you put it into a model, and then you will see what the correlation is between variables. But then we find that a more challenging way of getting data is the qualitative data, which is the in-depth interviews and the focus group studies, where you get the vibes of somebody's behavior. And that why is what helps us to run business, you know.
Yeah.
Just understanding the what the behavior alone is useless if you don't understand why they are behaving. You know, why is it that somebody wants to pay $15,000 and stay one night in Maldives when you know, they can go to the Himalayas and back? They can do a trek to the base camp and back in Nepal. You know, I mean, I love Nepal. I'm a fan of Nepal.
I have been there.
And oh, very much, because
Okay.
I worked at one time for a multinational company called Reckitt Benckiser, the guys who make Dettol. So
Okay.
yeah, so one of the markets that I was in charge of was Maldives and Nepal and Pakistan. So those are the three
Okay.
markets I was in. So I used to travel often to Nepal and back, and I've seen amazing things that you guys do. And once
Thank
I
you.
was when I was chairman of Sri Lanka Tourism, I remember in 2015 we had the World Expo in Milan, and when we went to Milan that year, y'all had just had the earthquake, that devastating earthquake,
Okay, 2015, yeah.
2015. And but y'all had developed such a beautiful miniaturized version of Nepal at the site in Milan, that I think y'all there were people who just walked in and just gave donations to Nepal.
Oh,
And I
that's
remember,
good to hear, yeah.
beautiful, and I think there were some millions of dollars that the whole world contributed at the expo in 2015, only because, you know, you all had beautifully architectured a miniaturized version of Nepal and the Himalayas. And
Thank you.
so I'm a fan of Nepal, Smita. So I think it's fantastic, this particular technique of where you get data to solve problems. And what you have actually highlighted is, you know, we do this in business, but we sometimes don't understand. But we use this Braun and Clark thematic analysis in our work. We use it very much to understand the different whys as to why they behave in a particular way when they buy a brand. And but we don't sometimes understand. You know, we don't use it as a technique. So what you have done is you have highlighted. Just a question that is coming up is, uh, what are the key challenges you see, Smita, in the education ministry in Nepal, which you would like to maybe share as a learning point for, or key trend that you see in Nepal that you like to share? Because I come from Sri Lanka, and of course, Dimantani is now based in Australia. But there are a lot of viewers who watch it in different other parts of the world. Uh, is there any example or trend that you would like to share?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. And talking about challenges, well, we do have plenty. I was just thinking where to start from. So yeah, being a low-income country and a developing, or even the least developed country, and with a lot of political instabilities, despite all those natural resources and natural beauty, cultural richness, and everything, speaking about system, yeah, we still have a lot to do, I would say. We do have a lot of problems. And I think in the recent year, As in my observation and experience, one major challenge facing in terms of social justice, I'm saying that school education especially is the divide between private schools and public schools. So in the recent years, what is happening in Nepal is public schools are gradually being, converted as venues only for the people who cannot afford private school for their children. So kind of the, divide between poor versus rich. So I see that as a big, big challenge in terms of social justice and inclusion. And from the overall systemic point of view as well. And another challenge is, we have made a very impressive progress in terms of increasing access to school education for all children. So in the recent decades, I would say the enrollment rate and school attendance rate has significantly progressed, which we are very proud of. But in terms of quality, quality is still a big issue for us, especially because our pedagogical ways, our instruction is still traditional. We are still kind of using one size fits all kind of instruction and fixed kind of curriculum. So yeah, quality is a big issue. And again, I refer to the economic status of the country. And because of that, we haven't yet been able to ensure sufficient funding for education. So that is another big issue, another big challenge, and because of which the quality is being impacted. Yeah, so we do have plenty of issues, and we are also taking initiations. The government is making policies, it is also making long-term education plans, and we are also getting support from the donor agencies, bilateral and multilateral both. But still, yeah, we still have a long way to go.
Oh yeah. To be honest, Smita, Sri Lanka is also coming out of a economic downturn. Our economy crashed to a -7% in 2022. And then, of course, 2023, we have seen the economy bouncing back. The quarter before last, we had 1.6% GDP growth, and last quarter, we had a 4.5% GDP growth. So we are also fighting to once again come on track with regard to the whole economic activity. And as you say, there are many challenges that come with when a country happens to be getting up into a situation of where they're trying to get people revival back to their normal, usual ways of life. Smita, it was lovely chatting with you, and it was so great to see Dimantini. Dimantini actually was one of our top lecturers at the computer school in Sri Lanka, and some of the research that she has done in the MSc in IT has been commercialized, even where private sector has paid and bought the innovation into their commercialization process. So it's a beautiful combination of having both of you in today's show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rohantha. Yeah, it was actually an honor for me to be here, and thank you, Dimantini, for trusting in me, I would say. And yeah, and Dimantini is doing a great work even here as well. I really wonder how she manages a full-time PhD and still, working back home and with kids at home as a mom, everything. So yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, I'm really so inspired.
It's great that people have not forgotten the country that they belong to, and I keep citing her as an example of where they've gone to in a developed country, but yet spending at least 3 hours a week every week, spending time on research, so that you share that insights you get from a top university like QUT into the Sri Lankan system. So thank you so much. It's really lovely having you both to give us your thoughts about a new way of doing research, and how you have brought it up and the relevance of it, not only from the education platform but also how it helps business. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Appreciate.
thank you, Dr. Rohanta. Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.